Hey, so this is my reflection video for MVS APUSH for Mr. Squire's class, and I'm going to be talking about slavery and the origins of slavery during the Revolutionary War because that was super interesting to me when I was reading it. So originally, before there was slavery, there was something called indentured servants, which is when someone owed a great debt to someone else, and so instead of paying it off with paying it off monetarily, they paid it off by working for them for 7 years, and then they were given a gift of land and some some cattle, so they could start their life after being a slave. So what eventually started happening was they were not giving these indentured servants all the things that they were supposed to get, so they eventually revolted, which led to the first slaves. And it's super interesting because the first slaves weren't the first slaves were not, as we know of, as we think of slavery, we think of racial inequality when we think of the perceived racial inferiority. And that wasn't the case during the Revolutionary War. In fact, during the Revolutionary War, it started because of an economic thing. Slavery was economic. It was not race based. So, in fact, tribes in Africa would capture and sell members of other African tribes and ship them to the United States and other places to be sold. Which was just, you don't even think about that, because it's like now there's a huge bond between African Americans in resistance of past slavery. And so it's odd to think that they would sell their own, but I guess they weren't really their own because they were in separate tribes. But what's super interesting is that race was used to justify this this slavery, because when you actually think about it, slaves are people too. I mean, obviously they are, and we know that. But back then, they tried to get away from that because they didn't want to have to think that they were, making these people undergo horrible, horrible circumstances. So they made them not people. They made them they made them less of it. They made them inferior. They were, oh, their skin is different, so they're not the same as us. And if they're not the same as us, they're not people, because we are people. And it's crazy to think about that, because you would never think that was the case. Yeah, I mean, I was just really, really struck by that in a special way, because and it's not like, and this is just a kind of an informative video. It's not really, what I think, because what I think is that it's crazy. I mean, obviously, I think that's crazy, and I don't even know what to say, because I have no idea. It's actually crazy to think about it, because there's so much racial inequality in this country right now, and the whole Black Lives Matter movement, along with many other movements. I can't think of any off the top of my head right now. It's 11:37 at night. But there's so many different things going on right now that stem from this slavery and from this racial inequality that, is a result of an economic situation. It's not a result of just like, oh, they were always inferior. No, no, no. At first, there were black slave owners back then. There was black slave owners. Well, towards the beginning of the Revolutionary era, slaves were very similar to indentured servants in that after 7 years they would, they would be free, and they would be given land and such. So they were few, but there were some black slave owners who, you know, were released from slavery and then owned slaves, but they were forgotten, and they were, they were they disappeared when they decided that they had to justify the slavery with racism, because otherwise they would not have been able to um, live with themselves. So I don't know. That's my piece on this. Peace.